Hi, this is Sue Bergamo, and welcome to Short Takes. Today's guest is Peter Vogel, trial attorney, cybersecurity, and compliance expert. We're going to be discussing the SEC's cyber disclosure rule. Let's get started. Introduce you to Peter Vogel, who is a trial attorney and a cybersecurity and compliance expert. We're going to talk today about the SEC disclosure rule. Peter, welcome to Short Takes. Would you like to start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
I have a master's in computer science, worked on a PhD, then went to law school, but I never intended to be a lawyer. My plan was I would do computer consulting. So when I got out of law school, I was a computer consultant. I did that for a few years, and clients asked me to represent them as a lawyer. So I just hung up a shingle. And then I was a sole practitioner for many years. And then I was in big law, and now I'm back as a sole practitioner. But in my career, I've had cases in 38 states. Failed software implementation projects, computer fraud and abuse cases, patent infringement, copyright infringement, things like that. And then the other half is transactional. But I have been involved in cybersecurity let's put it this way before it ever had a name, when the computer would be just black and we'd have to figure out what's going on. So I've been helping clients deal with security my entire career. Clients asked me to represent them as a lawyer, so I just hung up a shingle, and I was a sole practitioner for many years. And in 2022, I went back to being a solo. But in my practice, I've only ever represented buyers and sellers of information technology and internet services. And I've had cases, and I have a very active trial docket, as we see. And the other half of my practice is transactional. I do a lot of cloud computing contracts, among other things. And so cybersecurity is something I've been involved in my whole career. Data centers and now cloud, we have to protect them all.
Well, I'm glad that you have that background. We're going to have a very meaningful discussion today. Let me start by asking you if you feel that the SEC went too far with the cybersecurity disclosure rule.
Well, that's hard to tell. I don't think there's a simple answer to that, because the problem is that the SEC is concerned about publicly traded companies and the information that is being shared. So as an investor on publicly traded companies, I think everyone would expect that they understand what's going in a cybersecurity issue. One of the big problems, I think, with the SEC rule is, what do we know in 4 days? And when do we reasonably understand what's going on? And that's the tricky part. I don't think it's so much the reporting, it's when is that determined? Because in my experience, within 4 days, you don't know a whole lot, maybe even a week or two. And I think that's the biggest problem with the regulations. The other part of this is only publicly traded companies. And what they do is they have to give an 8K report. Well, what about non-publicly traded companies? They don't have any regulation like this. So that makes it a little bit more complicated, I think.
I agree with your statement. Having done incident response in the past, you only know so much in the first few days, but it is aligned to GDPR, which is 72 hours. So, the U.S. government gave us all, one extra day. And I think the point is that they just want us to disclose. We may not have a lot of information, but they're looking for that disclosure. And I completely agree with what you just said. The non-public companies, that's a big gap in overall disclosure practices. Have you had the opportunity to speak with board members about the ruling? And if so, what would you advise them about the cybersecurity breach disclosures and this rule?
Well, I have not spoken with any publicly traded board members, but I have been involved in a lot of discussions with other lawyers about these issues. And my experience generally is that cybersecurity is not a topic that's well received at board meetings. And it's usually pretty low on the totem pole, and people don't want to know about it. So I would think that this comes up kind of at the end of the meeting. But until there's a disclosure problem and an obligation to report to the SEC, a lot of times, a lot of boards have their heads buried in the sand and they don't want to know about it. Now, having said that, there's a greater trend today for boards of director representatives to understand cyber. this has become more and more important because front page news every single day is about a new intrusion or spearfishing or something, so that the companies are at great risk. And I think everyone watching knows that.
So do you think that the SEC should have gone as far as to put the CISO on the board?
That's a different issue because the CISO in different organizations reports to different leaders. In other words, generally, the CISO, I'm going to say this generally, that is very general. Oftentimes, the CISO reports to the CIO or the CTO or the CFO, but that doesn't necessarily get the right person involved, because my experience has been one of my clients, the CISO reports to the general counsel because the lawyers want to know what's going on. And I think it varies company by company, and there's no uniformity. Also, there's a lack of uniformity about what a CISO is to begin with. It isn't quite like a CPA where you take an exam and then you're qualified as a CPA. There are no credential testing methodologies that are out there. People just get the job, so they may or may not have the skill set that allows them to really communicate. Now, the other problem is, I'll say this in the worst way possible, I think anybody that's any good with a computer is incapable of having a meaningful relation with another human.
That's hysterical.
Well, but it's
I
true.
totally understand that statement.
But why I'm saying it is the critical part. CISOs and CIOs do not speak English like this conversation we're having. They use technical jargon, and they do a very poor job of communicating with the C-level and also with the boards. And that's a real problem that is not being overcome easily in today's world. The other part is, last time I saw a statistic, it's something like there are more than 1 million security jobs available around the world, and nobody really even knows the number. So we're understaffed in this area. It's a real problem.
It's actually like 4 million. So I try to stay up with the statistics. So let me ask you this question. Should CISOs be concerned about their personal liability? They've got this new ruling from the SEC. They're not sitting on the board. They report into all different variations of executives. What should the CISO be doing? Should they be concerned?
Well, I think they should be concerned, and I think it would be important for their employers to make sure that they have insurance coverage to take care of it. If anybody would take the time to read the SolarWinds lawsuit that the SEC filed, you'll see that, among other things, the CISO, who's being charged personally for this, he attested that SolarWinds was compliant with NIST, when in fact, after they did the investigation, it was only 6% compliant with NIST. So if a CISO would sign something saying that they're in NIST compliance, when in fact it's only 6%, that person shouldn't have signed that. That's a criminal problem. And I see that to be a huge issue. That between that and the SOC and ISO audits, there are things out there where there are commitments that are being made.
So be careful about what you sign legally and the commitments that you're making verbally as well.
Well, I don't know so much about the verbal, except if it's being recorded, because the thing is, you and I are having a conversation, and when this conversation comes to an end, we will each have two memories of what the conversation was. And that's what happens when you have an oral conversation.
Okay. So any other advice that you would give the CISO as they move forward, as this rule moves forward as well?
Well, let me say this a little differently about the SEC. The SEC and the Federal Trade Commission and many other federal agencies, when they actually go after a company, they don't go after everybody in the industry. They usually pick a company and an individual like SolarWinds, and they say, we're going to make an example, and we want everybody else in the industry to say, wait a minute, now we know that if we are wrong, we're going to get sued by the SEC or the Federal Trade Commission or whoever the agency is. So that's important. The other thing that I think is important is what industry is the CISO working in? In other words, different industries have different requirements. So the banking industry has one set of requirements that are different than healthcare with HIPAA. And so it really makes a difference, I think, as to what the industry may be.
Do you believe that in 2024 we'll see a CISO go to jail?
Uh, I would hate to speculate because let me say it this way: as a trial lawyer, 95% of all cases that are filed don't go to trial. So there may be some plea bargain where somebody says it's easier to go to jail than it is to sit in a trial for 3 or 4 months. So whether or not someone goes to jail for doing it, they may not feel they did anything wrong, but they may not also be able to afford to go to trial for months. And hopefully their employer is financing the legal fees, but maybe not. And if not, what choice do they really have? So going to jail may not really be the trigger. The trigger is, will this continue to grow? And the answer to that is definitely yes, because I think what's going to happen is when the 8K reports are being made to the SEC about an intrusion, plaintiffs' lawyers are going to be monitoring those 8K reports, and we're going to see class action lawsuits all over the place to try and make money against that company for violating cybersecurity regulations.
Do you believe the CISO should be standing alone in these trials, or should another executive be standing alongside of them?
Oh, I think the C-level should all be standing next to them because I think that's the critical thing. I grew up as an accountant. Everybody in my family is a CPA, father, brother, uncle, cousins, and I'm kind of black sheep because I am not one. But why I'm saying that is the CFO in every company is one of the most critical individuals because that's where they make money or lose money, and everybody gives them respect because the number of ERP systems I've been involved in over the years is kind of critical. But the reason I'm saying that is whatever's going on managing finances is all part of what's going to happen, so that it seems to me the CFO ought to be in the middle of it and the CEO. So I think that that's really important.
Interesting. Okay, last question for you. There's been a little talk that Congress may pull back on the rule. If so, what do you think that they should be pulling back on?
Well, I've heard that about Congress too, but I'll say this in kind of the worst way possible. I don't have any confidence in what Congress does. They don't understand the technology, and so they make decisions for the wrong reason and create laws that don't make any sense. But what that means is, in order to challenge what Congress would do, assuming that happens, someone has to go to trial. And I dare say my experience has been most judges don't understand this stuff. So if you have to rely on a trial court to figure out what's going on, then however the ruling turns out, then that has to go to an appellate court, maybe to the Supreme Court, and then the law is understood by the public. But that's the way the law works. So if Congress gets it wrong, then we'll fight about it in the courts for the next so many years. That's kind of the unfortunate reality of legislation passed at states or at the federal government.
Well, the good news is someone like you has a lot of job security. Someone like me, maybe not so much as a CISO. Anyway, I want to thank you for your time. I thought this discussion was amazing. And I'd like to continue the conversation with you as this ruling moves forward and more CISOs, unfortunately, may be charged. We may be back at the podcast, at the microphone again in the near future.
Sure, happy to discuss it anytime, Sue. Thanks for including me today.